This week on my quest to see what food from history tastes like, I'm going back to Victorian England to taste these dishes from London's first ever vegetarian restaurant and to learn a little bit about the history of vegetarianism. So many people are spreading some New Year cheer by indulging in veganuary, which got me really curious about the history of veganism and vegetarianism, which is really difficult to research because people have been enjoying plant-based diets ever since they realised that hunting a woolly mammoth looked like a lot of effort. So I'm going back to Victorian England to try some dishes from London's first ever vegetarian restaurant, as well as looking at the history of veganism, vegetarianism, and some surprising facts about them all. The menu from the Alpha restaurant isn't hugely exciting to look at, which probably wasn't great PR for the vegetarian movement, but I'm going to start by recreating the dish which I feel has the most potential, which is lentil cutlet and sauce. As is often the case, we have the menu but no recipe. But I did find a vegetarian cookbook from the same decade written by a Mrs. Bowditch which contains a recipe for lentil sausages, which starts by telling us to measure out a half pint of lentils. I'm opting for red lentils as my go-to for any vegetarian patties I've made before, so into a pan on a light simmer they go. Once the 90 minutes are up, the recipe tells us to add 3 sliced onions to the party. So our onions and some salt go in the mix and we boil for another half hour. At this point, the recipe tells us to stir in a ½ ounce of butter, 4 teaspoons of sage, and a ½ teaspoon of grated lemon rind. It then tells us to leave off the lid so the lentils can dry, which we'll come back to in a minute. It's really hard to define the history of plant-based diets, as for many cultures throughout history it was more of a necessity than a choice. And it really was during this time in Victorian England where vegetarianism was starting to turn into more of a social movement, which isn't to say that vegetarianism didn't attract some ridicule along the way. In 1899, the New York Times ran a 400-word story called "Vegetarians Have a Picnic." It was literally a ridiculing story about vegetarians having a picnic in public. Throughout history, there have been many noteworthy proponents of the meat-free diet. Pythagoras, everyone's favourite triangle fetishist, he believed that eating meat muddled the soul. Or maybe he just didn't trust bacon to follow the rules of geometry, I don't know. Leonardo da Vinci was said to have been disgusted by meat. He's quoted as saying that eating meat made humans a walking graveyard, which is a bit strange coming from a man who dissected cadavers in his spare time. John Harvey Kellogg, the inspiration behind everyone's favourite childhood breakfasts, he did a lot to advocate for a vegetarian lifestyle, believing it could alleviate any number of health problems. However, he also claimed that masturbation turned people insane. So one way or the other, he took his health very seriously. But certainly when I was a kid, the bleakest example of a vegetarian that everyone always came up with was Adolf Hitler. But actually, Hitler wasn't a vegetarian. Later in life, he adopted a meat-free diet, believing it would help his issues with flatulence and constipation, just for the mental image that no one needed in their lives. But in recent years, historians have found out that his favourite food was said to have been young pigeons stuffed with liver, tongue and pistachio. So even if you argue that he was a flexitarian, he wasn't dabbling. People don't eat pigeon stuffed with tongue if they're eating meat casually. So while the lentil mix is drying, we need to contend ourselves with the sauce the menu says the dish comes with. And although the menu is very vague around what kind of sauce it is, fortunately, my favourite new Victorian vegetarian includes a sauce which she says is perfect for lentil dishes. But lucky me! It's called sauce à la bonne femme, and we make it by melting 2 ounces of butter in a small stew pan, then adding to it 2 sliced tomatoes, 1 sliced green leek, 1 sliced green apple, and then frying it for 20 minutes. I'm already having a lot of very strong feelings about this fruit and veg combo, but I'm just here to follow the recipe. Once we've done our stewing, we need to add a ½ pint of lentil or haricot bean stock. So I'm going to use some bouillon powder to make some vegetable stock and pour ½ pint into my stew pan. We're also adding in a teaspoon of lemon juice. I'm then going to blitz it together, strain it through a sieve, and just like that, you have a Victorian sauce for eating with lentils, which unfortunately have gone a bit tits up. Now the lentils have cooled, the recipe tells us to turn them out onto a chopping board, chop it, mix it with egg, shape it into a sausage, and then fry them. But that ship has sadly sailed along with our lentil mush. I tried reducing the mixture further, I tried sieving out the broth, I even tried to put the sloppy lentils into moulds and refrigerate them, but it was pointless. I just wasn't going to be able to shape them and fry them, which left me with one solution, and that's to use a pack of pre-made lentils so I can try this sauce and get something even resembling a thumbnail. Lentil cutlet, green beans and sauce is what it is on the menu. We've ended up with green beans, a bonne femme sauce, and a little puck made of pre-made lentils. I'm just going to try this as an excuse to try the bonne femme sauce. My hat's off to whoever made those lentils because they're very tasty. The bon femme sauce, I don't really know what's going on with the bon femme sauce. It's tangy from the green apples, it's sweet because of the leeks and the tomatoes, but it's a bunch of flavours that just don't go together. So when you combine the lentil cutlet, the bon femme sauce and the green beans, you can't help but feel it's a pretty weak poster child for the vegetarian movement. I think it's very telling that the best thing on this plate is the stuff that I didn't make. Right, no, enough of that. But it's okay. My expectations for the lentils weren't that high to begin with, so I also decided to try a pudding from the Alpha menu. They had a number of rice puddings and stewed fruits which sound predictably uninspiring, but they had quite a nice pastry section, including apple tarts and peach tarts. It was about 9 years after this menu was published that the tart tatin was said to have been invented, and about 3 years before the French chef Auguste Escoffier invented peach Melba in honour of his favourite Australian opera singer. So it was clearly a good time for puddings, and though it's slightly apocryphal, I'm going to make a peach Melba tart. I'm going to add to the bowl of a food processor 500 grams of plain flour, along with 250 grams of cold, cubed, unsalted butter. I'm then pulsing it until I've got something resembling breadcrumbs. I'm then slowly adding cold water a little bit at a time until it comes together in a ball. I'm then turning it out onto a floured surface, bringing it together, wrapping in cling film, and putting in the fridge for about 30 minutes. After that, it's time to roll out the pastry. Lift the dough into your pie tin and press in at the edges. We're then laying down a circle of baking paper, adding baking beans, and blind baking in the oven for 15 minutes. Remove from the oven, choose an inefficient way of getting them out. Then it's time to contend with our peach Melba filling. To a pile of peaches, I'm halving them, slicing them, then adding the peach slices to a bowl, drizzling over the juice of half a lemon, coating them all as much as possible, and then sprinkling in 125 grams of golden caster sugar. Carefully lay them down in the pie casing. Place in the oven for 20 to 30 minutes, and when they picked up some colour, remove the tart and top it with some raspberries before returning to the oven for about 20 minutes. Once the pie is cooked and cooling, we're going to make a raspberry coulis by blitzing some raspberries in a food processor, along with a squeeze of lemon and 2 or 3 tablespoons of icing sugar. Blend together, then sieve through a sieve. Then once your peach Melba tart has cooled, top a slice of your tart with a scoop of vanilla ice cream and a generous drizzle of the raspberry coulis. Peach Melba tart. That's a crunchy pastry, I can already feel that. Oh god, that is heavenly. This makes the evening not a completely lost cause. Great. It's just a really fantastic combination. You got the sweet peach with the tartness from that raspberry coulis coming through. The pastry too, it's also stood up really well to all that syrup that's collected from the bottom of the fruit. I don't think lentil cutlet was the greatest of advertisements for the vegetarian movement, but if you were slightly cynical and you stuck around longer for the pudding, you may well have gone back for another try.